Hello, somebodies!
We are the nobodies.
What are we doing here today?
Today we are talking to the great author, Steven Rosen.
How you doing today, man?
I'm doing great, guys. How are you?
I would say pretty good, honestly.
I'd say fantastic if I had to say.
Excellent. Happy to hear that.
So, you're a pretty damn big journalist in the music industry, and we really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to talk with us. It really means a lot. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, we got a series of questions, and I'm going to start off saying that being you are such a big journalist and a big interviewer, how does it feel to be the interviewee?
I'll tell you, man, I love that question. And I'll tell you, I love being the interviewee. I mean, it's, for about 47 years, I was the interviewer. Mm-hmm. And for the last 2-3 years since my Tonechaser book came out, I've been fortunate enough to be the interviewee, and it feels really good. Do you
feel the skills transfer over from one side to the other?
Well, I mean, I kind of do, to be honest with you. I mean, I've been involved in so many interviews, and as someone asking the questions and the other person responding, I kind of know hopefully what makes a good interview from an interviewee. So I've tried to, translate those skills from sort of writer into interviewee and man, listen to the questions. And I've actually found out that the details really help to make a story. So I've tried to become a better storyteller. You know, I was a pretty good storyteller when I was writing about it. So try to become a better storyteller in the actual oral narration of it. Mm-hmm. And but I'll tell you, I love being on this side. So I'll let you freaking guys do all the work. So let's go here.
All right. Rock on. All right, Jonathan, number 2.
Yeah, let's get right into this. So, speaking of being an author, Tonechaser, you released it, your 26-year journey with Eddie Van Halen.
Yeah.
What compelled you to write that book?
I'm trying to think if compelled is the right word. Certainly there was a compulsion to write the book. That was part of it. Part of it came from, I have a guilt complex. It's like I'm always apologizing for things and this and that, and I actually thought to myself at one point, man, and I'm talking to myself here, if you don't write this book, you're going to be really sorry. So did a part of it arise from feeling that it was something I had to do? I truly believe that's what it is. A lot of people will put the word catharsis on it. And I don't know if that was part of the thought process. I mean, maybe a little bit of it was in there. So just a little bit of background. So I meet Edward Van Halen in 1977, 8 months before the first record comes out. So he's still kind of a local phenomenon at that point. They had been signed by Warner's. The record was not out yet. But he was still like just a local kid made good. Really like the first guitar player, the first band to sort of come out of the Sunset Strip to land a big deal. So we meet on a Friday night in July 77, and we hang out and we're friends until 2003. That relationship sort of didn't end well. And for those of you listening, if you want to find out what happened, go and buy the freaking book. But seriously, Edward changed, and I think maybe that was part of the reason why I wrote the book is like, well, what happened? Why did he change? Was it something that I did? So that's 2003, the relationship ends. Fast forward 17 years, it's 2020. And I had some friends who knew that I hung out with Edward back in the day. They said, hey, man, you got to write the book. You got to write a book on Edward. You got to write that book, you know. And honestly, I didn't sort of consciously avoid it, but it was something that I did not want to do. It was actually something that I didn't know if I was capable of doing. So Edward Van Halen, arguably the greatest guitar player who ever lived. When I start the book, Edward is still alive. Or when I'm thinking about the book, Edward is alive. And I'm thinking, look, man, and again, talking to myself, if you're going to write this book, it's got to be on the same literary level that Edward was as a musician. In other words, it has to be this perfect sort of literary opus that you're writing. I mean, that's how I looked at it. It had to be perfect. It had to be like a 580-page guitar solo, right? It couldn't be one wrong note, right? The phrasing had to be perfect, and it had to be the best fucking thing you ever wrote, you know? And that was intimidating to myself. It's like, oh my God. And then if you think about, well, I met him in 77. So now I'm going back to 2020. What is that? I can't do the math. 48 years. You know, it's like, my God, you know, do I remember enough? And anyway, I sort of started it innocently, you know, and again, was it a compulsion? I don't think so. I think it was more a thing of, let's just sit down at the computer keyboard and see what comes out. My cat, Arpeggio, would wake me up at ungodly hours every morning because he was hungry. 3 o'clock in the morning, he'd wake up, meow, meow. I have to feed him. So I lived in like this little Hollywood Hills house, and there was an upstairs, and the kitchen was down the downstairs. So I'd have to navigate the stairs and put the lights on, you know, and feed him his cat food, and then try to go back to sleep. Well, it got to a point where I could no longer fall asleep. And at that point, I thought, you know what? Let's go into the computer room and let's just do some writing. I mean, my mind was on the book, but it wasn't specifically that. It was just like, you can't sleep. Let's see what comes out. So I sit down and I start typing, you know, and what came out was that first paragraph in Tonechaser. And I thought, wow, you know, this is pretty good. And I read it the next day and I go, hey, this is pretty good. And this is coming from someone who is like, I've been critical of every single word I've ever written. I look at those stories and go, oh my God, that is horrible. You can't send that in, rewrite it, you know. So I look at this paragraph and think, hey, this is pretty good. And I just kind of followed my nose, you know. And at a point in time, if you're sort of on the right track, a book, like a song, you know, will kind of lead you. It's like, oh yeah, that F sharp minor needs to come next, you know, or oh, that transitional phrase needs to come there as a writer, you know. And I just kept going, and 14 months later, it was done. So you know, you asked me, Jonathan, was it a compulsion? I don't know, man. It was a need. I knew that if I didn't write it, I would really feel guilty for the rest of my life. Like, man, why didn't you write it? If for no other reason than writing it for yourself, just to say you did it, you know, mm-hmm. I knew I would always look back on that thinking, you left a hole, man. You should not have done that. So I think there were a lot of reasons. And at the end of it, you know, I was 580 pages, and I thought, wow, this is good. It was the best book I could have possibly written, you know. I mean, I really went over every word and tried to make every word count, and I was really happy with what came out. And one other little wrinkle here. So I begin the book on August 24th, 2020. And I remember that day because it was my birthday. And I thought, well, okay, let's start on my birthday, you know, maybe I'll have some good luck here. So I sit down to write. And as I mentioned, my relationship with Edward had basically fallen apart at the end. I had not spoken to him since 2003. So this is 17 years later. I thought, I'm going to write the book. This is going to be sort of my peace offering. this is going to be the bridge that's kind of, bring us back together. And 6 weeks after I start writing the book, is it October 26th, October 6th, Edward passes away.
Oh.
So 6 weeks after I begin the book, Edward passed away. So I'm about 2 or 3 chapters in, and I'm thinking, oh man, what do you do now?
Yeah.
I was on sort of a roll, but I thought, are people going to think, oh, the Rosen man, he only wrote that book to cash in on every, I told you I have this guilt complex. The idea of anybody thinking that way, I couldn't deal with it. That's the last thing I wanted. So actually in the book itself, I talk about when I begin it before Edward passing away. Then I thought, well, do I continue writing it? At that point, I think maybe a little bit of the compulsion came over. I thought, okay, man, you started this thing. That was the hard part. You need to see it through to the end. And if nobody reads the book, okay, look, I wanted people to read a book. And anybody who writes a book and says, oh, I just wrote it for myself, they're fucking lying. It's too much work to say, I'm just going to sit in my room with this manuscript and say, oh, look what I did. That's just not the truth,
True.
So I finished it, I kept writing. And so that was difficult. That was sad.
So this whole entire book was about you and him, or did you go to some of his fellow colleagues and band members, and did you ask them questions about stuff, or this is 100% about you and him?
Hi, man, that's a good question. So let me backtrack again a little bit. So let's go back to 1985. I had been friends with Edward for about 8 years at that point. 85, the 1984 record had just come out. They were arguably the best band in the world. Sammy had joined the band, right? They were monstrous. The journalist in me said, hey, you know what? Writers are going to come out of the woodwork. They're going to want to write Edward's life story. And I'm thinking, I want to write that story.
Yeah, I got to do better, yeah.
Right?
Got to feed into it.
Yeah. So I approached Edward. Honestly, it took me months to build up the courage. In Yiddish, there's a word, it's called chutzpah, which is basically the balls to approach him and say, Edward, I want to write, the story of your life, So I remember driving over there on that day and telling myself, you're going to ask him, And I go into 5150, and of course he's sitting there with a guitar in his hand, his ubiquitous guitar and his cigarette, right? He always had those. Mm-hmm. And I said, Edward, listen, man, writers are going to come to you. They're going to want to write your life story. I would like to write that story. And I'm thinking he's going to go away and he's going to say, well, let me think about that, And he, takes a puff, goes, yeah, man, it would have to be you. It couldn't be anybody else. And I thought, wow, that felt pretty good. I mean, that felt enormously unbelievable. So in answer to your question, yes, what I did is I started interviewing people. So I interviewed Alex, of course, and Michael. David I'd already interviewed. I interviewed a bunch of his school friends from Pasadena, guys who used to put on the concerts with Van Halen back in Pasadena, guitar techs, thinking that the book would be, yes, all the interviews I'd done with Edward, but peppered with all of these comments and insights from all these other people. Well, I'd been working on that book for about 4 years. I realized that it wasn't going to happen. And I go, Edward, man, we got to sit down. I got to ask you some more stuff about the book. And his response was, well, man, now's not the right time, And he always said that, He says, well, if we do the book now, the next album won't be in the book. And I was like, I had no argument. I go, yeah, I go, Edward, but there will always be a next album with you. Right? It's not like you've got another album and then you're done, So in answer to your question, that book, which was going to be his authorized biography, yes, would have been that type of a book. Fast forward to 2020. For some reason, I kind of wanted to leave the idea of that book behind, and I kind of wanted to start anew. So yes, so this book is basically what it was like hanging out with this remarkable guitar player for 26 years.
Nice.
And so it's virtually all sort of me describing events, going to the NAMM show with him in New Orleans. I jammed with him a couple times, unbelievable as that sounds. We'd go into the 5150 and he'd hand me a guitar. He goes, "Hey man, let's jam." It's like, "Sure, Edward, I'll jam with you. That's no problem." And so those kinds of stories. There might have been one or two other little comments from somebody, but not much. In the end of the book, there was a chapter that I called Van Halen's Voices. And some of those interviews I just described with the friends, guitar techs, I took out, maybe a few paragraphs and sort of put those in a section by itself, sort of an oral narrative section. Mm-hmm. But the book by and large is just me hanging out with Edward, all the interviews I did with him, and again, commenting on what it was like hanging out with him and really trying to give the reader a feeling of, well, what's that like to be at your little Hollywood Hills house and having Edward Van Halen knock on your door and you didn't know he was going to come over, and he comes in and he grabs your guitar and starts playing,
Beautiful.
What does that feel like, So, yeah. So
you mentioned that just 6 weeks later into writing this book, Eddie Van Halen passed away, right? How did it at all? And if so, how did it impact your writing style for that book? Because I can't imagine you're writing the exact same type of book pre-passing and post-passing.
That's a good question. One of the things that I really wanted to do with the book, and you hear this word a lot, was be transparent. Look, we all know Edward Van Halen, guitar hero, right? The guitar god, standing on stage in the famous smile and having the beautiful house and the remarkable studio and the extraordinarily successful and beautiful wife and the cars. And it's like, you look from the outside and you think, my God, he has it all. What doesn't he have? Well, I didn't want to write that story because that's not who he was. He was a human being, just like you and me and everybody else, and he was sad and he was disappointed, just like all the rest of the world. But after he did pass away, I did think, maybe I got to pull back on the reins a little bit, and because there were moments that were incredibly honest, but they weren't the most flattering moments, And I'm thinking, do I really want to write about those moments? Do I want to put that down on paper? Am I somehow besmirching his legend somehow? Am I going to anger fans who know Edward as, again, this guy with a wonderful smile and this great guitar player? That's the last thing I wanted to do. But in answer to your question, Jonathan, I don't think I really changed the approach or the style. I think I was that same writer, and I was really very honest with it. And again, there are moments in the book that are just honest, but it's in those moments when I think you really understand who Edward is. There's some moments in there when we're talking about, he's thinking about his dad, who he adored. His dad was a musician, and I think his dad was a major influence in his life to ultimately pick up a guitar. And we were talking, he was talking about how much he loved his dad. And he was talking about how much, how much he would miss his dad when he passed away. And what is he going to do, And that was a really vulnerable moment. And I'm thinking, do I write about that? Am I betraying a trust? because he's telling me these things. But I think in those moments, you really understand who he is. You really get it. And there's some moments when, he's talking about the band and he's talking about Dave and Michael Anthony, and he loved those guys. But there were moments when he wasn't really happy with them. And in really open moments, he tells me about that. Well, do I include that? Do I write about that? And I thought, if I don't, I'm lying to myself and I'm lying to everybody who's reading the book. And it's in those moments, I believe, and readers have sort of confirmed that's really how you understand who he is, as not just Edward Van Halen, this guitar hero, but Edward Van Halen, human being. So no, I don't think I changed the style at all. And I think, if anything, maybe I focused down even maybe more trying to reveal, who this other person was. And again, the title of the book, Understanding Edward. That's really what I wanted to do. I really wanted you to kind of know this person when he wasn't on stage. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I understand.
So, yeah.
Well, it sounds like it's going to be a very, very, very fantastic book, and I'm glad you just gave us a whole insight into it. But we got so many more questions to get to. So how many artists have you interviewed in your career?
That's a great question. I have never done an exact count. I should. I would say 2,500 is probably a pretty safe guess. Yeah,
Wow.
And some of those guys, and I'm only counting them as one interview. I've interviewed multiple times. I've interviewed Joe Satriani probably 15 times. Same with Steve Vai. Obviously, Edward, I interviewed dozens of times. But it's a pretty amazing archive,
Wow. So
pretty extensive.
When did it all start? Like, how old were you? Were you like 8 when you said, I want to interview people? Like, give us the whole story of where it started.
Yeah.
So it really grew out of a love early on. I love to read. So even when I was young, I can remember the moment I learned how to read. You're in school and right, you learn the letters, and I loved the idea of writing as well. Remember the letters, you would be like that.
Yeah, B, 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 B.
Exactly, and you had to come down all the way and make the circle for the B, and then you learn like script and how to write it. I don't know what it was, man. I just love that whole process. And then I remember learning how to read. You're looking, you're going, cat, and you get the word, and then that process just meant so much to me. So early on, man, I was transfixed with reading and words and the whole thing. I can remember going to the library, and they had issues of Guitar Player. So I'm jumping ahead a little bit here. And I remember looking at these issues and I don't know why I thought, but you know what? I could do that. No, again, I'm fast forwarding a little bit here, but I was playing guitar, just messing around, and I'd done a little bit of writing, but I was reading those stories and I thought, I can do this. I don't know what came into my head. So I started sending out just like little simple album reviews, because to get an interview, you had to know management, you had to know a publicist, and that wasn't going to happen unless you had some stuff published. And you couldn't get some stuff published unless you could go interview. So it's kind of this circle, thing. But record interviews I could do, So I remember getting used records and writing reviews. I remember getting a couple things printed in some like local throwaways. And then that kind of leads into, maybe a little better periodical. I remember writing for the LA Star, which was kind of like a softcore porn tabloid. And I say porn because you used to buy them, not that it was filthy, but you used to buy the LA Star to turn to the backstage and look at the massage ads, right? You weren't buying the LA Star to read Steve Rosen's review of T-Rex at the Hollywood Palladium. You know what I mean? It just grew from there. And I just really loved the act of writing, and I love music. I was collecting records from an early age. I remember going to used record stores, man, and getting a used Jethro Tull record for $2 or a Stones record or a Spirit album. I mean, my God, it was the greatest,
Greatest times back then. He'll never understand, man. He'll never.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. You young guys, records were the greatest. I mean, that's how artists recorded. It was analog. You were meant to hear this on an album, on a vinyl, not as a download, not as a stream, not as an MP3, and not on a CD. I don't care if they clean up all the noise on a CD. That's not how it was meant to be listened to. Anyway, I digress. But it just really grew from there. And then you get something printed in a semi-legit publication. There was a tabloid called the Los Angeles Free Press. It was an underground newspaper, but very hip. And I remember writing a review, and they printed it. And I remember getting the issue. And there's the kind of thing where you put a quarter in the machine, you remember, and you'd pull up the lid and you pull out one issue. Well, I remember I would check every week to see if they printed it, So I'd kind of hold the lid open with my elbow, and I'd look, if they didn't
and then put it back in.
I put it back in, But then, I put in a quarter, and open, and I see the issue. I see the store, and I go, oh my God! So I stole all the issues. It was like 10 issues. I just thought that was the greatest feeling, seeing my name, and then getting a check in the mail for $20. I thought, my God, I am a published author. And that feeling, it's like everything else, man, your first kiss or your first car, it never quite feels the same. But it was that feeling, I kept pursuing it. So, the LA Free Press led into me writing some stuff for Cream and Circus magazines, which were like very hip magazines back in the 70s. In 73, I start writing for Guitar Player. Back then, if you were a guitar player, you wanted to be in Guitar Player magazine. I mean, if you wanted to find out what kind of strings Peter Frampton was using, you bought Guitar Player magazine. It was the only place you could find out about it, So I did a lot of amazing stories for the 7 years I was writing for him. The first story I ever did was Jeff Beck. I did Jimmy Page and Frank Zappa and Joe Walsh, John McLaughlin and John Entwistle. That was amazing, And it just kept growing, And you're trying to become a better writer, and you're getting flown around the country to do these interviews, and they're sending you free T-shirts, and you're getting tickets to shows, all this great rock and roll swag. I mean, they're paying you like garbage, right? The magazines weren't paying you anything, but it didn't matter. I mean, I would have done it for free. Getting to meet these people, I would have paid you.
That's our goal. Like, we started as a father-son, and we wanted just 15 minutes with each other to hang out. And here we are on YouTube now with 41,000 subs. We're having great interviews, and it's just growing and growing and growing. And hopefully you share this with as many people as you can. And that's how it happens. You know what I mean?
Don't quote me on this, but now that I'm thinking about it, I believe this is interview number 50 for us.
Is it?
I'm pretty sure. I am pretty sure this is interview number 50 for us. So congratulations on that note.
Yeah, man, that's cool. And your approach is absolutely right. There's 1,000 guys on YouTube. You can see them, and they have chops. My God, these guys can play. You see these 12-year-old girls. My God, they played better at 12 than I played in my lifetime. But the truth of it is, a lot of these guys, they want to be a guitar hero. And I can tell you right now, if your main goal, learning to play guitar, is wanting to be a guitar hero, it is never going to happen. Your goal as a podcaster is saying, I want to have the biggest fucking podcast in the world and have it's never going to happen. People see through that. And if it's not genuine and comes from the heart, it just never happens. The point being, I don't think I ever pursued that thinking, I'm the greatest writer. I want to write for every magazine,
Why do you think we call ourselves the nobodies? Because we
exactly,
never nobody.
I love that, and it's all about respect. And people come on your show and they feel like there's respect. And this thing goes back and forth, and I think that's what I did through my career. You asked me how many guys I've interviewed, and they felt that. They knew that. Look, I'm not saying every interview I ever did was like my favorite guitar player. You know, back in the day, it's like you would do interviews with people because that publicist also handled all these other bands that you did want to interview. But still, you were respectful and you went in there. But yes, man, you know, it's an organic thing that grows. And yeah, man, you guys will be here 10 years from now. You'll be on your, you know, you'll have 10 million views. So
that's the goal. But
that's the goal.
Cool.
So would, I guess on that note, was there someone you interviewed where like you were like, oh man, I can't believe I'm finally interviewing this person, or it's like, holy crap, I've made it if I'm interviewing this person?
I mean, that's a good question. I don't know if I ever approached it from the standpoint of, oh, I think I've made it, though that was probably there in the back of my head. It was always a situation where I can't believe that I'm talking to this person, because I used to play their records when I was little, or I used to play their songs in bands, you know. I mean, again, part of it was probably like, yeah, man, you have reached a level where you do have access to those kinds of artists. I mean, that did probably come through. I mean, I can name so many of those people. Brian Wilson, my God, sitting in a room with Brian Wilson. So I grew up in Culver City. So the Beach Boys were from Hermosa Beach, which was a beach town, I don't know, about 20 miles south of Culver City, you know? So, I mean, the Beach Boys, my God, I had my little transistor radio. I remember hearing those songs, you know, I Get Around and Help Me Rhonda and California Girls. Oh my God. I mean, the closest I ever got to surfing was, you know, sitting in my bathtub. I mean, you know, I couldn't even, you know.
Yeah, I've seen the Beach Boys 7 times myself.
Oh wow.
Yeah, phenomenal.
Yeah. So, you know, so meeting him, meeting Pete Townsend. I mean, the Who, you know.
The list goes on and on. All right, so let's get to the real question. We just lost one of the biggest icons of life. Ozzy Osbourne started a whole genre in metal. Like he just came out and parents were like, "Oh my God, this is Satan." But he created a whole entire generation and generations of music as far as we could see. Supposedly, from what I read in your emails, that you might have some good stories about Black Sabbath and Ozzy Osbourne.
So I do. So I actually first met Sabbath in '74. I flew back to St. Louis, which was coincidentally where I was from originally, and
that's where I did my army. Fort Leonard Wood.
Oh, cool. Nice. I'm trying to remember what magazine it was for. I can't remember. But, you know, I heard stories about Ozzy and, you know, all the Satan stuff. They're all into it, you know, and I didn't know. I mean, you know, I could have walked into their hotel room and, yeah, they could have been dark. And I don't mean, you know, they were roasting goats over an open fire, but, you know, they could have had, you know, a dark kind of temperaments and stuff, you know. And I walk in, and these are Birmingham guys. And I don't know how many Englishmen you know from Birmingham. They are the funniest fucking guys on the planet. I walk in, and they are just the nicest, coolest, most open guys. Ozzy is a riot. He is one of the funniest people I've ever met. You talk about the Satan thing. Ozzy and the rest of those guys were about as far away from Satan as you and me. There was an image, and yeah, that just wasn't him. So I'm there. I interviewed the band. They are so cool. They're all great. Tony is an amazing, I mean, incredibly nice guys. And I see the show. And the next morning, I'm in my hotel room, and there's a knock at the door. And I think it's Ozzy and I can't remember who was with him, one of the other guys. And they come in and they start trashing the hotel room. I mean, they rip the TV off the hinges, TVs in hotels, or they rip it off and they throw it against the wall, man. And they are trashing it. They are putting holes in the walls. They set the couch on fire. I mean, the place is a mess, and I'm looking at it going, holy fuck. And then they look at me and go, well, the room's under your name. You're going to pay for it.
That's crazy.
Well, I probably wasn't going to pay for it. The magazine was going to pay for it, but I saw the end of my career with that magazine, going up in smoke, no pun intended. Honestly, while it was happening, I thought, this is the greatest fucking thing I've ever seen. I mean, it was rock and roll, it was great. And they were into it. Look, when I say the sofa was on fire, it was. And they took a lighter and they put it like on one of the cushions. And I mean, it wasn't like flames to the ceiling, but it was smoldering. I mean, it was burning. I mean, it was smoke-filled room, I think it was actually a fire hydrant and they sprayed everything. I think I got sprayed as well. Not in the face, but I mean, it was a lot of damage, And I think they just left, and I was about to leave anyway, so I go and check out, and I'm thinking, oh, Mr. Rosen, we hear, $3,000 damages, and so I go to see what's going on, and they go, oh yeah, don't worry about it, man. All the charges have been taken care of, so they paid for everything, but they were amazing. Fast forward. 2001, I actually wrote a book about Black Sabbath. So I had actually interviewed Ozzy a couple more times in between. I interviewed Tony. Geezer had been really helpful. We actually faxed. Jonathan, fax. You probably don't even know what a fax is. Yeah. But we actually faxed back and forth,
right?
Exactly. It's like you tie a little note on the claw of a pigeon, one of those things.
Yeah.
But they were great, and what made Ozzy so great is that he was the same person that I met in '74. I think I interviewed him all the way up until certainly the early 2000s or mid 2000s. He was the same person. The guy was funny. He was a riot. He never took himself seriously, and he was a truly decent guy. He was just a little crazy, I mean, and that's what rock and roll was. And again, he had that thing that I think people understood, that they felt that thing in him, like you could hang out with Ozzy Osbourne and you're going to be totally comfortable, and he was going to treat you like a pal, and he was going to buy you a beer. And people get that, people aren't stupid. Fans aren't stupid, they have that empathy. And I think that's what made him so enduring and so lovable, so loved, really. Yeah, he was an amazing guy. They all were.
Did you ever interview Randy Rhoads, his number one guy?
I never did interview Randy. Coincidentally enough, I actually wrote a book on Randy. I was approached to write a book about him, and I didn't want to because I don't like books written by authors who have never interviewed the person they're writing about. I just think, how can you truly understand that person? Look, I'm not saying good books haven't been written that way, but to me, it always felt secondhand. So the idea that I was going to write a book on Randy, never having interviewed him, I thought, well, that's ridiculous. Anyway, I sort of got talked into it, and it was a book that I wanted to write. Again, so I'd interviewed Ozzy, I talked a lot about Randy during the interviews we had done. I talked to a lot of other musicians who knew Randy and had worked with him. So I did end up writing this book, which actually came out pretty decently. But no, I never did interview him. And one of my regrets in hanging out with Edward, I only asked him one time, well, what do you think about Randy Rhoads? Because depending on who you asked, they had a great feud, or no, they really had respect for each other. I remember asking him one time, so what do you think about Randy Rhoads? He goes, well, I like him, and Randy's like the only guy who admits that I was an influence on him. And that's about all that he said. I wish I had dug deeper, but yeah, so
Yeah, well, they were truly two great guitars. So, you know,
Absolutely. And here's something that maybe I shouldn't say. I saw Randy when he was in Quiet Riot. When Randy was still playing the Les Paul before he, changed to the Jackson, the Randy Rhoads guitar. And Randy he was a good guitar player, but I didn't think he was like amazing. So you have to remember, this is like 76, 77. I mean, there are a lot of great guitar players around at that time.
yeah,
Right?
he
Like
was still growing.
I'm sorry?
He was still growing.
He was still growing. And I don't think he was, again, this is me thinking out loud. I don't know if he was challenged enough in Quiet Riot, But again, there were other good guitar players around. There were great guitarists, Warren DeMartini, right? And George Lynch. There were a lot of really good guitar players. Once he gets in Ozzy's band, right, that bar is now raised. And Randy, this is the game you're in now, right? You're in the big leagues now. Look, I don't want to diss any Quiet Riot fans, but I think Ozzy really raised his game, right? He becomes an entirely different guitar player. The sound of his guitar, the recordings. So, yeah.
No, listen, we all grow. You know what I mean? It's just we talked about it already. It's like you could be a good writer, but then you meet freaking Stephen King, and now you're in the big leagues. You know what I mean? So that was Ozzy for Randy Rhoads.
Absolutely.
So, in terms of other artists you've listened to, you've spoken with, Yngwie Malmsteen.
Oh boy. You had to fucking go there.
I wanted to bring it up. It seemed a little interesting.
It's all good. I'm just busting the couch. So it's really an amazing story. It's like, if I was going to make up a rock and roll story, this is the one I'd probably make up.
AI could never create a story like this, is what I'm about to hear.
No, exactly. So my best friend back in the day, and still to this day, is Jimmy Waldo. Jimmy was one of the founders of Alcatraz. I remember him telling me, listen, man, we just got this guitar player in the band, this Yngwie Malmsteen. You have to interview him. Jimmy knew I was writing for Guitar Player at the time. And actually, I'm sorry. I was a little bit later. I was writing for Guitar World, and I was always looking for the new guitar player to talk to. And he said, you got to interview Yngwie. And his caveat to me was, he's an asshole, but he's an amazing guitar player. And I thought, okay, I met other assholes, along the way. And we can talk about some of those if you want to later on. So he was living, so I was in the Hollywood Hills. He was living what's called the San Fernando Valley, which is sort of up and over Mulholland, which is kind of up and over Laurel Canyon, which is kind of a famous street in Hollywood in the valley. And he was living in this little apartment. And I remember knocking on the door. Oh, and I had called Guitar World because I was writing for Guitar World at the time. I said, hey, I'm going to interview Yngwie Malmsteen, do you want a story? I go, yeah, we want a story. Look, I'm not saying that I hadn't heard of him. I had. He had played in a band called Steeler. I had just never heard him play. I heard his name and I'd never seen him play, but I had heard his name. So I knock on the door, and this guy comes to the door, and he's got he's got a strap around his neck, and he opens the door, hey, Yngwie, Steve Rosen goes, yeah, man, yeah. And I come in, and, I sit down at a table, and he sits down, and he's like practicing, and I'm watching this guy play, and it truly was astonishing. I mean, it was amazing. I mean, he's, doing what we would later come to know as all this neoclassical stuff, So he was a listener to. He loved classical music, and so you hear like all these classical kinds of runs embedded in sort of this very rock style, which would become neoclassical, which every guitar player in the world would later sort of pursue. So he's kind of practicing and going through runs and stuff. And I'm sitting on my little cassette player, and I get it set up. And I love when guitar players have a guitar around their neck or are playing when I'm recording, because you can hear it on the tape afterwards. And it's great. And it's happened several times. And I kind of love that. Plus, the guy's playing the guitar, he's more relaxed, you know. So I said, you know, so Yngwie, you know, how about, and he goes, no, man, stop. I'm not done practicing yet, man. Okay, you know, fair enough. He's got his practice regimen down. And so he, you know, he's plays about another 5 minutes. And I think, you know, he's kind of winding down. So I go, Yngwie, you know, so what do you think about, he goes, no, man, no, don't talk. I'm done. And I'm trying to imitate his Swedish accent, you know, it's pretty thick, you know. I'm going, okay. It's the second time, and I'm becoming mildly peeved.
Yeah, like, so I'm here for
playing.
you.
Exactly. So he keeps playing, and now it's like I've been sitting 15, 20 minutes, and honestly, I don't need Yngwie Malmsteen in my life. I could have walked out the door, you know. I could have told Guitar World the guy's the biggest asshole who's ever lived. I wasn't going to sit there and be disrespected, you know. I've never walked out on an interview in my life, and I've always tried to be present. So I thought, okay. So he finally winds down, and I'm thinking, well, you know, so Yngwie, you know, you've obviously spent a lot of time practicing. I thought, that's a safe place to start. He goes, no, man, I don't practice. I go, you don't practice. Okay. And we start talking, and it goes from bad to worse. He lies, his ego. Oh my God, this guy. Jeff Beck was and still is my favorite guitar player. I think Jeff is the greatest who ever lived. I think Edward was probably one of the top 5, you know? Okay. But every guitar player I'd ever talked to, I use Jeff as sort of the yardstick, right? I measured everybody by Jeff Beck. And if a guitar player, didn't like love Jeff Beck, it's like, okay, well, you just slipped about 10 notches on my barometer, pal. You better do something to raise it back up, you know? I mean, I didn't do that, but, you know. So so I said, so, you know, Yngwie, what do you think about Jeff Beck? And he goes, who? And I go, Jeff Beck. And he goes, I never heard of him, man. I go, Yngwie, let me get this, because I knew he was fucking lying. I mean, it's like me telling you, you know, you never heard of the Beatles?
Yeah, well, Neil Peart. I mean, as a drummer, right? You never heard of Neil Peart?
Exactly. So I said, Yngwie, let me understand this. You have never heard of Jeff Beck. He goes, no, man, I never heard of him. So we go on, and it just evolves. And there were moments when he would, you know, he would offer some interesting comments and insights, you know. He's not a stupid guy. He's just, his ego was so outsized. Excuse me. So we're talking, we wind it up. We actually take some pictures afterwards. I can send you some of these pictures if you ever wanted to print anything. And he looks kind of happy, you know. You know how a guitar player will sometimes, he'll like take his finger and run it down the string to kind of clean it, you know, just kind of a quick clean. So he was doing something, and he did that, and I watched it. The string cut into the pad of his first finger, and I'm telling you, man, a string is like, it's like the edge of a razor blade. I mean, it cut, and I saw that happen. And I saw blood gushing out of his first finger. I'm thinking, this guy is going to have to go to the hospital. I mean, I'm not laughing. It was scary. And I'm looking, I go, Yngwie, my God, are you okay? He goes, yeah, man, I'm okay. I go, Yngwie, he goes into the bathroom, comes out with toilet paper like wrapped around like this huge mitt, and the blood is seeping through the fucking toilet paper, turning red. I mean, it's like in a horror movie. Like they've squirted fake blood on it. I'm going, Yngwie. And he goes, no, man, I'm okay. You know, you talk about karma. Well, this was instant karma, man. Fast forward a couple months, that story comes out in Guitar World. They called it the guitar. Sorry, genius with a chip on his shoulder, and I thought that's perfect because the last paragraph of this story, I wrote, if Yngwie Malmsteen can stay out of his own way, he will be, some huge guitar hero. And he was incapable of doing that. Over the years, he would piss off other writers. He'd piss off musicians. He'd piss off management. He pissed off labels. He pissed off everybody. The story comes out. I'm sorry, the guitar hero with chip on his shoulder. I can't remember the exact title, but it was something like that. Fast forward a couple of months, Ronnie Dio was playing at the Forum. It's a huge arena in LA. Afterwards, there's a party, an after hours party at a place called the Cat and Fiddle Pub. So I'm there with my friend Jimmy Waldo, who despises Yngwie. And he's the one who said he's an asshole. He hated him more than I did. He told me stories about Yngwie on the road. They'd be recording and Yngwie would say, man, your keyboard is out of tune. Keyboards don't go out of tune. And he'd go, Yngwie, you fucking asshole. My keyboard is not out of tune. Yeah, man, your keyboard's out of tune.
Oh no.
Maybe he'll pretend to tune his keyboard, They play live, and Yngwie would solo over every verse, every chorus. He'd solo from top to bottom in a song. They'd go on the bus, and Yngwie would take his sweaty stage clothes and throw them on Jimmy's bunk. Jimmy would take his guitars and throw them the length of the bus and just scuff the shit out of them. So we're at this party. I'm there, and I don't really drink, but I had like a gin and tonic. I want to look cool. So I'm standing there minding my own business, and I see Yngwie over there, going, oh God. So I see Yngwie walking over, and he goes, he's drunk. Yngwie had a problem with that. He had a problem with a lot of things, which never didn't help him at all. So he walks over, and he's fucked up. He goes, man, you're a fucking asshole. And it really didn't mean anything to me because he meant nothing to me. He said, you're a fucking lousy writer. Obviously, he had read the story.
Ah, yes.
He goes, you're a fucking liar. I go, Yngwie, you can listen to the cassette, every single word in that story I have on tape. You want to hear it? And then, and I don't want to even repeat what he said, he makes an anti-Semitic remark. And I sit there and, I take it, he's fucked up. And then he kind of doubles down and it gets even more severe. I just come unhinged, So I take my drink, like it's like in a Western, the good guy throws his drink in the face of the bad guy and temporarily blinds him, So he goes up, and I kind of clock him, kind of a half hit, half slap him, and he goes down and we're grappling. And by now, and he's bigger than me, and I don't think I've ever been in a fight in my life, but by now I really want to kill him. I really want him dead, and I, he's got me and I've got him, These two bouncers come over. I think they had seen what happened. The fireman's grip. One guy like grabs the legs, the other guy like grabs like the torso, and it kind of takes you out, sort of like one guy grabs you here and one guy grabs you there, and they kind of, carry out. Well, these two guys come over and they physically threw him out of the party. They come over. I think Wendy Dio came over and apologized for him. My friend Jimmy Waldo was ready to kill him, to try to defend me. That's in, I think it was around 85. Fast forward 10 years, a Japanese magazine I wrote for called Player wrote to me and said, hey, we want you to do a story on Yngwie Malmsteen. Obviously, I'd never spoken to him again. We want to fly you to Miami and interview Yngwie Malmsteen. And I thought, well, the last thing I want to do is go talk to Yngwie Malmsteen. But I figured Yngwie, like every artist, they're going to get a list from their publicist. At 10:30, they're doing an interview with Rolling Stone. 11:30, they're interviewing with the LA Times. They're getting their own little schedule. So I'm thinking, well, look, Yngwie sees my name on there. if he's allowed my name to remain on there without crossing it out, it's like, okay, fuck them. I'll take a free trip to Miami. So I remember going, and I was with my friend Neil Zlozauer, photographer, who actually shot the 3 covers of my Tonechaser book, was Van Halen's official photographer in the early days. So we go, and I remember thinking the whole way, if this guy starts up again, I am going to fucking kill him. I'm going to fucking kill him. So I remember knocking on the door, I'm fucking poised and ready, He's going to open the door. So he opens the door, and the first thing that he does, man, he grabs me and hugs me. He goes, man, I'm so sorry. I apologize. I was drunk. I shouldn't have said those things. I'm so sorry. It's like, what are you going to do, man? The guy apologizes. What more can you ask for? He was like this amazing host. Yngwie has a collection of Ferraris. He drove us around his Ferraris, took us out to dinner at all these really wonderful Miami restaurants, showed us his guitar collection. He collected guns, but really rare guns. He had like the gun that De Niro used in Taxi Driver, where he's looking in the mirror. That was, he bought that gun.
Did he get sober?
I don't know. He got more sober. He just realized that he had done something wrong, and we sort of became friends. I would subsequently do about 4 or 5 interviews with him, and he was very cool. So, the ending of the story is a positive one.
No, that's where I thought that would go. Okay.
No, that's great.
Yeah.
All right. So, we got some great stories, and what we like to do is always ask, the interviewee, what advice would you give to future authors or journalists that might follow in your footsteps?
Man, that's such a tough one. And I hate to be a pessimist because I love the idea of new writers getting out there. It's a different world. It's no longer a print world, right? It's a digital world. And not to say that there still aren't magazines out there, but you're probably going to find life initially doing as you're doing. Start your own blog, start your own podcast, bring people on, and use that as a source for your interviews, and then write about them and maybe pitch those stories to magazines. I would still go out and find the address. And that's one of the beautiful things about the internet. You can find addresses and emails and, phone numbers. So you can send text messages. You can find the names of editors, features editors for just about every music magazine on the planet, online. Go pitch them.
Yeah, sky's the limit.
And I think,
hey,
I got a bit of a follow-up question that I think kind of goes in hand with this last one. What do you think it is that allows you to create these connections with the people you talk to?
I always wanted to be, I wanted to be John Steinbeck, right? I was never going to be John Steinbeck. I have my favorite authors. I wanted to be them. I was never going to be them. There are some incredibly good music journalists. I was never going to be as good as them. I didn't go to journalism school. I took 1 year of UCLA and basically flunked out. And I write about that in Tonechaser. But so realizing I wasn't going to be the greatest writer, I tried to find this little niche. So what is it that I could do? Well, I was a guitar player and I was a songwriter. I understood composition. I understood lyrics. I understood melodies and how lyrics had to, the rhythm of a lyric and how it had to fit in to beats and bars. And I understood chord changes, and transitions. I understood all that. And I knew enough about guitars. I'm not a technical guy, but I knew enough about guitars to talk to guitar players on that level. And again, a word that I keep going back to was respect. So I walk into that room And it's just something that they sense. And it's not going overboard and being a sycophant or being a nerd about it. It's just they sense this thing, when I was doing interviews, I could tell that moment where it went from interviewer and interviewee into being two guys just talking about music and guitars. And I knew it. I could feel it. And I was, my inner voice would say, there you go, man. There's the place you want to be. And at that point, the interview would take off even better. So I think it was that respect. Look, man, I did a lot of homework before I would go in to talk to these guys. So remember, back in the day, there's no internet. You can't go in there and find every single thing about that person, what they ate for breakfast and their favorite kind of tennis shoes,
Mhm.
So, you'd have a press release, you'd listen to all their music. But I mean, I would dig down, and I'd find a solo that I go, oh my God, listen to that one little phrase. And I'd pull out that phrase and they go, and even if they didn't say it, they go, wow, this guy was really listening, he really cares about being here with me, and it's just all these little bits and pieces you put together, and I realized I didn't have to be the best music journalist in the world. I wish I could have been, right? I strive to be, but I think it came from a place of respect, and doing your homework, and just being a total professional about it, and you can show a little bit of nerves. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. You just can't let it really get in the way.
Oh, absolutely. That's exactly what I say. I say, listen, if I can't talk to someone being me, then I don't even want to talk to you. You know what I mean? If I got to fake myself, if I got to act like somebody I'm not, you know what? You're not worth my time. I got my family. I got my job, and this what we're doing here. We love it. We love. But if I can't talk to someone and just like, if I feel an attitude or dude, I don't need it. We are, we're good, man. And I think that's probably the way you felt about it too. Like you said with Yngwie, I don't need you. I got freaking 25 other guys that'll talk to me. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's those moments, again, I never walked out on an interview. I tried not to attack in any way verbally, but yeah, I think those are the moments that really try you. And as I, hinted at before, there were musicians that I didn't care for, that were kind of, they did not want to be there. They didn't care. They didn't care about the interview. They were condescending. You try to be professional about it. It's not always the easiest thing. And probably those interviews, ended up on the cutting room floor. Mm-hmm. Well, fuck you. I'm surely not going to go publish a story about you after you're an asshole. So, I get to put the knife in a little bit. I mean, I'm not a martyr, I'm not the.
Well, not for nothing. Tell me this though. Don't you think as a reader or someone, we love doom and gloom as a human species. So don't you think the asshole stories are probably the ones that people would want to hear? Like, oh, we could hear about Eddie's solo, but we want to hear about Eddie's freaking time he punched you in the face. That's what we want. That's what we want to hear. So how come more people don't go that route? You think there's a boundary?
Probably, and a lot of guys are afraid to do that. I've really tried to do that a fair amount, and it's gotten me into a little bit of trouble. Frank Zappa was a tough guy, and I wrote about him not being the world's nicest guy, and I got blowback. I wrote about the Eagles. I saw the Eagles. I was never an Eagles fan. I need to say that up front. And I wrote a review about them that was scathing. Now, I may have gone overboard. I got a call from management, and they were going to sue me or something, or send somebody to the door, beat the shit out of me. But yeah, I mean, there probably is that element, you know, and yeah, I mean, yeah, people tend to look at, you know, car accidents, you know.
Always.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well.
So just so we could get popular, could I say Steven Rosen called me an asshole and just curse me out right
There
now?
you go. Absolutely. I'm gonna tell him the father and son family, stay away from those dudes.
What a bunch of dicks.
Oh my goodness.
That's funny. No, this has been amazing. Yeah, thank you so much for your time. We are going to do an outro now, and we want you to be part of it.
Excellent.
Remember to hit that like, subscribe button. Tell us down in the comment section below what your favorite story was from here today. Steve, thank you so much for joining us, man. You got hell of a good stories. Like, this was really fun. I enjoyed this. Press the little bell next to the subscribe button to get notified every time we upload a video. I'm Son.
And I'm Father.
And you are?
And you are?
Steve Rosen, journalist extraordinaire, author of Tonechaser. Check it out.
Yes, rock
Rock
on.